Principal Matters Podcast, episode 464. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And Jen, I've been holding on to this conversation in full for a while because we've shared pieces of this throughout the last semester and some parts of summer. But last year, you invited me to one of your courses that you've been teaching.
Right.
And so set the stage, because we decided that today we're just going to share that whole conversation in full.
Well, and yes, and you said last year because you're thinking in school terms. It wasn't actually a calendar year ago. It was last school year. So it was about last April, I think. I was teaching a group of students at The Ohio State University. They all want to be principals. So they're all current teachers, aspiring principals. And so, I thought they don't need to hear me drone on for the next 15 weeks. Let's have Will stop in and let's create some questions that Will can answer for them. So they were all podcast fans. And when I told them you'll all be on the podcast, they were super, super excited. I can guarantee that had never happened to them before. So that's what this class is. Such smart, and thoughtful, dedicated educational professionals. And they got to spend some time with you, Will.
Well, and I just loved their questions. You did such a great job as a professor, asking them in advance to just have the questions ready. And they were so deep and probing. A lot of them had to do with human capital, because I think the course itself was talking about how to develop the capacity of the people that you're serving. So, Principal Matters listeners, as you listen to this conversation, I'm going to guess, especially those of you that are either aspiring or practicing, whatever your places in your journey, you may have had different answers to the way I respond to these questions, and that's fine. Feel free to reach back if you would have wanted to provide some other insights that I didn't. I love to hear from listeners, or if you know someone who maybe is stepping into leadership and this would be a great way for them to just think through some of those questions in advance, then please share this resource.
Yeah. So this is Will on the Hotspot. That should be the title of the show, Will on the Hotspot. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to this.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. At Principal Matters, we talk a lot about leadership, culture, and building strong school communities. And this fall, I want to invite you to a powerful event where we will take those conversations even deeper. On September 24th through 25th, Aptigy's School CEO Conference in Little Rock, Arkansas, is bringing together K-12 leaders from across the country to explore one big question: how do we break through the noise and connect with families in today's competitive education landscape? This year's theme, What Parents Want, dives into research-driven strategies for parent engagement, enrollment growth, and building trust. You'll learn how to reach today's families with clarity and purpose, how to stand out from other districts, and how to use digital tools that actually work. Day one is hands-on workshops, and day two will be back-to-back keynote speakers, including one from me. With only 500 seats and no vendors, this is more than a conference. It's an experience. Learn more at aptigee.com/conference or visit schoolceo.com. I hope to see you there. Why is IXL used in 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts? Because it works. Research across 45 states shows that IXL schools outperform other schools on state tests. With IXL, you get a personalized online learning and teaching solution that helps you improve achievement, empower teachers, track progress, and more. This one platform for K-12 helps teachers accomplish what normally would require dozens of other tools. For example, as students practice skills, IXL automatically adapts to ensure each learner is always supported and challenged at the right level. IXL also provides every student with a personalized learning plan to help them close knowledge gaps effectively. One of my favorite things about IXL is their personalized test prep tool. For exams like the SAT and ACT, IXL will analyze a student's most recent score and generate a custom list of skills to help them boost their scores. If you want to take the load off your teachers so they can do their best work, IXL can help. Learn more at IXL.com/PM.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Welcome, Principal Matters listeners. We have a different format tonight for you. This is Dr. Jen Schwanke coming back. And of course, Will Parker is on the call. Will, say hello.
Hi, Jen. It's so fun to be with you.
And we have 22 other people on this call. We have literally never done this before. So here's what's happening, listeners. I teach a graduate class at The Ohio State University, and this class is about human capital and working with people, right? And so I was telling Will about this and asked him if he might drop in on the class and just kind of tell them a little bit about his leadership journey. And Will, being Will, was like, "What would happen if we recorded
Mhm.
this guest spot?" So that's why we're here, right, Will?
This is going to be so much fun. And if listeners could see what I'm seeing right now, I'm getting to see just the amazing faces of educators all across the state of Ohio, but a few people outside of Ohio. So, Jen, you have such a diverse group of students,
Yeah.
but leaders and educators who are committed to this work too. So, I'm just really, really honored to be in the room with all of you.
And so the other 22 people on this call are all seeking their principal's license. I surveyed them at the beginning of the semester and asked them, how many of you want to be principals? And the answers were maybe. So I'm going to wait and see. This is a very capable group. Any of them could step into a leadership role, but they are learning about the role of a principal. So I had them kind of gather some questions ahead of time,
Yeah,
and they are going to, well, they're just, this is kind of you're on the hot seat. They're going to ask you
yeah,
questions
yeah.
and you're going to answer them. So
So can I suggest one thing before we do the questions? Sorry, you
absolutely.
know how I am. I'm always like, can I just share one thing before? Um, because this is a group of educators who don't know me, can I just share like quick 8 things that are important to me about being an education leader before you ask me those questions? And I promise I won't like own the whole time with just these things.
Yes, no,
Okay.
please tell them,
Okay.
tell them the
So
eight
so
things.
so, so let me if you can make me a co-host, what I'll do is share my screen really quickly because I've been sitting on this content for probably 15 or more years now because um, years ago I was recognized as Oklahoma State Assistant Principal of the Year, and I had a lot of opportunities to begin to just share with leaders this or potential leaders some of the things to keep in mind as you think about making that transition, because some of you haven't decided. But whether or not you decide to make a transition to the role of principal, you're still a leader. And in that role, I think there's certain responsibilities that are pretty common among all of the different hats that you have to wear. Most of you are aware of the national standards that surround what's necessary for school leaders to make effective change in their schools. What I've tried to do is take those standards and just kind of think of them as the different hats that we wear. For instance, a leader has to wear the hat of a coach because someone has to make in the important hard calls every single day, whether it involves instruction or student behavior or outcomes happening in a school. And what I've discovered is if you let that decision be um, motivated by fear or motivated by your ego, you will hit the wrong target. So, how do you hold on to making sure that you're coaching and making the final calls based on what you know are the best outcomes for student learning? Number two, you have to learn to wear the hat of management. And this is not easy because none of us like to be managed. But Jen, and I know you resonate with this too, there is a difference between leadership and management. But I have never worked for a leader who couldn't also manage well. I've never worked for a strong leader who couldn't also manage well. I've worked for some poor leaders and they struggle with management. So this is something where it's important for you to know what are your key responsibilities and how do you define the responsibilities of those you lead so you don't spend all your time correcting behavior that was never defined. So how do you define the performances that you're wanting to see? And then the third hat is what I call the hat of the counselor, which means a commitment to deeply and actively listen to others so that you understand before you try to communicate what you want to have understood. And this takes a lot of patience and practice because I'm a problem solver and I like to get things done. But what I've discovered is, especially with students and teachers, the complexities involved first require studying and understanding before executing. Then there's the hat of what I call accountability, which means that if I'm going to measure growth in others, guess whose growth I have to measure first? My own. And so I have to be willing to practice self reflective practices to take a step back from my own experience and reflect on those cycles of learning that happen within my own growth so that I can lead others towards growth. And then there's a hat of what I call the chief communicator, because here's the truth that if we fail to celebrate and showcase and highlight the great things happening within our schools, someone will tell that story for us. And in the absence of information, people create their own narratives. And so a lot of times you're dealing with toxic cultures, not necessarily because the whole school's toxic, just because that's what's getting talked about, instead of being willing to focus and communicate also the amazing things that are happening. And then just a couple of more. The importance of never forgetting what your role is, what your title is. You can still roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. Being a servant leader means that you go first. And then the last two, and this will probably come up one of our questions. No leader ever does anything courageously. Let me rephrase that. You can do a lot of things with courage, but if you want to accomplish great things, you have to do it with teamwork. And so no matter how independently skilled you are, if you want to see schools really grow, then you have to be willing to build others and their capacities to do this together. And then last but not least, and this is a hard lesson I had to learn, if you stop staying committed to your own personal growth and your own self-care, you will burn out. It doesn't matter what position you're in. And so this is a hat you have to keep putting on too, which is every single day, am I making sure that I'm reading and thinking and meditating on the things that are helpful for my mind? Am I committed to the nutrition and exercise and sleep necessary for my own self-care? Am I spending time with my family in the way that they deserve to know that they're loved? Am I staying visible and present with the people I serve? That personal growth part of you keeps you plugged in. So, man, Jen, that may be the fastest I've ever run through the hats. But I just wanted to give you guys some context for some of the things that are priorities and values for me before we start answering questions.
Excellent. And that's great, because that will help us frame these actual questions. And all of them do fit in one of those buckets for sure, one of those 8 buckets. So I'm going to ask the first question that's going to be asked of Will is about leadership evolution. And this is Emily. So introduce yourself, Emily, and ask the question.
Hi, my name is Emily Jeans. I currently teach 3rd grade. How did your leadership style evolve over your course of your principalship? And how did it impact the way that you managed human capital?
Such a good question. Thank you, Emily. Okay, so quick story. When I moved from high school English teacher to high school assistant principal, it was in a school with about 1,400 kids. And I remember, this is going to date me because in those days they gave you the set of keys. You know, some people now can just swipe their keys, but back in those days they gave you the set of keys. And I felt this like sudden surge of power. I have the keys. I can get into any room. I can open any door in this building. And that sense of leadership, because you talked about the evolution of leadership, that sense of that it lasted about one day. It probably 1 hour after all of the things that stepped into the morning office of the first day of school. I couldn't believe. I was like, all the prep, my master's degree, in all these things that you're doing right now with me, where I'm interviewing other leaders. And it only took me a couple of hours to recognize that I don't know all the answers. I don't have the solutions for every single thing right off the top of my head. I need to go ask for help. I need to pull somebody else into this conversation. I need to go research and investigate this. What I had to learn over time was, just like in the classroom, it took me years to really begin to hone the skills necessary to lead student learning. It's the same thing. And so my leadership evolution, I would say over time, that sense of, and I'm just going to call it ego, that ego had to be removed really quickly to recognize that leadership for me became more of an emphasis on understanding the people with whom I'm working and how we can collectively serve others. So the second part of your question, which is how did it impact the way I manage human capital? And that might just be obvious, that I recognize that people that were surrounding me, my teachers and staff, every one of them has unique talents and gifts that they can offer to what's going on in this school that I don't have. And so just realizing the gift that you have in other people and how to harness that gift. And so it's not the goal is not, I'm going to collect as many people like me as I can over time to lead the kind of school I want. The goal is, how can I surround myself with other people who can do things differently or better than I can, so that together we can collectively make a difference when it comes to serving kids. So I would start there, Emily. Jen, what do you want to add? Oh, you're muted.
I'm laughing, Will, because we had a conversation early this morning, and this is literally what we talked about. And my thing, I would like to adjust what I said. The other thing I've done differently is I used to take everything personally. Now I take almost nothing personally, because it's not always about me, that's for sure. So the next question is about hiring for fit versus skill. So Brittany, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Brittany Oliver, and I am a third grade teacher. And my question is, when building a school team, how do you balance hiring for specific skills versus hiring for cultural fit?
I'm so glad you asked that, Brittany. It's nice to meet you. Well, I'm just going to be really blunt. And I'm sure I'm not alone, because I'm sure Ohio faces this too. But especially in the state where I live, in Oklahoma, it has become harder and harder to find either the skill or the cultural fit. And so in the past, when I first started my career, there may be an opening, in the number of candidates that you had lined up to try to take that position were so deep that you could be really picky, and you could just really scrutinize, and you could be laying up like three really high qualified people against each other and trying to pick that right fit. What I've discovered in the last several years is that, because education is so difficult, and because this is Will, because states don't apply the amount of funding that I believe is important for what teachers deserve to be rewarded with, then that pool has gotten more shallow. But having said that, Brittany, when it comes to building a school team and balancing skill versus cultural fit, I will say this: competency to me is super important, but competency is often something that can be developed in someone. Character is usually something I'm not going to develop in someone. That's something they bring to the team. So I may be changing the answer to your question, but because for me, the cultural fit, what's most important to me for a cultural fit is the character and the integrity of and the values of the person I'm looking at, because they may not necessarily. I want a school where people think differently. So if I'm looking for everybody being the same, stepping into my staff or my school, then what a sad place for kids to be. But I will say this too: I have worked in settings where the cultural norms are so, how do I say this politely? I have worked in settings where the cultural norms are so the same that it's sometimes hard to recruit people in that can help make the culture better too. And so some of those things as a leader you can control. I remember specifically going to job fairs in searching for new teachers and trying to recruit people in that would help change our culture and make it better too. But that's got to be a happy marriage for both people, because you've got to be a really brave person to step into a place where you're the new person coming in to affect change in a culture. And so, so it works in both ways. I wish I had the luxury to say that I always have a pool of people that I can make those distinctions between skill and cultural fit, but I don't always get that luxury. Sometimes you're just looking at who's the capable individuals that I'm looking at, and how can I help shape them into what I want to be. But for me, the heart has to come down to character above all else, because the last thing I want is somebody that I can't trust and doesn't share the kinds of values that we know are going to make life great for kids. So I don't know if I'm answering that question directly or not, Jen, but that's what I thought.
No, that's great. And I would say, ideally, in a perfect world, we want both fit and skill. We've talked a lot in this class about this, looming teacher shortage we have. And, a lot of people don't want to be teachers now, and it's no surprise. I mean, not, as I said earlier in this class, the students don't know this. They're not necessarily treated all that well, and they're not necessarily paid all that well. And so, it's hard to find something that is both. And then we have to keep them. That's once we've got them hired, we've got to keep them. So Emily has a question for you about retention. Emily, introduce yourself and ask your question.
I'm Emily. I teach 7th grade math. And what are some of the most effective strategies you've used or that you've seen for retaining high quality teachers, especially if you're teaching in a challenging school environment?
Yeah. So I'm going to refer to a couple of friends of mine that work in some pretty challenging school environments. One of them, and I won't name them because I didn't get their permission, but one of them is a principal who led a school here in the Tulsa area, middle school for a number of years. And that school was completely transformed. They were having difficulties with attendance, behavior, teacher retention. And over about a 7-8 year period, they were able to transform that school to the place where they had improvements in all those areas. And as often happens in some school districts, his great work got rewarded with reassigning him to the hardest high school in the city. And so he's one of the leaders I get to do some coaching with. And by the end of first semester, he had already seen improvements in every observable metric. So student attendance had improved, student misbehaviors had declined. Teachers had already indicated to him the majority that they planned to come back. And this was a huge shift for his culture. And it's hard to say because there's not a magic formula, but I will say this, that when I compare him to other leaders that I've worked with who have seen high retention and quality, it reminds me of a quote. There's a book I've been reading this year called The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a great book on leadership. And there's a quote where he says in this book that the responsibility of a leader is to inspire trust. And what I would say I see happen among schools with higher retention is leaders who inspire the trust necessary for people to want to stay there. And we all know what it feels like to be on the other side of strong leadership, where I feel like I'm heard, I feel like we're together, I feel like I'm trusted. And whether support doesn't always mean we agree, but we know that we're on the same page and we're moving in the right direction. That's a place I like to be and I like to work. But we also know what it's like to be on the other side of a leader who I can't trust, who doesn't follow through, who's not reliable, who doesn't do what they say they're going to do. And that's a place where things become really toxic. So I could speak to that in more detail, but I'll just say that your commitment to trustworthiness is, I believe, the most important foundation for retaining good people on your teams.
Well, and I'm going to jump in and add, I actually have a book coming out in August, and it's called Trusted, and it's about trust in schools. You guys, research has proven that when staff trust their principal, student achievement goes up. And you guys are all nodding. Our listeners can't hear the nod, but it's happening because all of you are teachers and you feel that. You're like, yeah, if I trust my principal, I'm more engaged in the instruction. I have more collaborative conversations. My students are more engaged because they know that I am. So there's a lot of reasons, but that's what research will show you. Okay, the next question shifts a little bit away from hiring and retention and into difficult conversations. I love this topic because it's something that I think everyone who's human struggles with. So, Christina, this is yours. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Christina Mahan. I'm actually a middle school art teacher. And my question is, as a principal, how do you approach difficult conversations with underperforming staff while also maintaining dignity and fostering growth?
The first thing that comes to mind, thank you for that question, Christina. The first thing that comes to my mind is
What?
How do I
You need
treat,
time for the
how do I treat people like I want to be treated?
right.
So if I'm being corrected, what do I want to be like on the other side of me? And so if my commitment in providing somebody feedback is I want to see them grow, then that's going to come across in the way I communicate. If what I'm communicating to them is you're frustrating, irritating me, and I'm tired of the way you're behaving, that's going to come across in the way I communicate it too. So it's the same thing. I hate to, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to burst any bubbles, but I'm just going to say it out loud. Communication with faculty, staff, peers, leaders, educators is really not that different than communicating with kids. And I know it seems like it should be because you're like, well, they're adults. They should just know things, or I can't talk down to them. And I'm not suggesting I don't talk down to kids. And so if you talk down to kids, then you're probably going to be somebody that talks down to adults. So the same respect that you address students with so that you can help them move from whatever their craziness that they're doing back to the thing that they should be doing is the same kind of communication skills that we should be using in leadership. And I think that's the best I got, Jen. What would you add to that?
Well, somebody told me earlier in my career, I'm watching you all to see if you nod or if you roll your eyes. Somebody said we are what we teach, meaning we behave like the grade level that we teach.
Mhm.
Okay, I got some laughs. I think there's some truth to that. I really do. And so if you have to have a difficult conversation with a first grade teacher, remember that first grade teacher spends all day with first graders. And so that's something to keep in mind, as opposed to if you walk in and have a difficult conversation with somebody who's working with graduating seniors in May. It doesn't mean you talk to them like that. It means you keep in mind who they work with every day, because we are what we teach. I think that's just a
That's a
little.
really good distinction, Jen. Yeah, thank you for reminding me that because
Exactly.
yeah, I don't want to make the mistake of speaking to someone like a first grader. Please don't hear me saying that.
Right. You'd never want to do that. But you also want to keep in mind, if somebody, like, let's say they're in a intense behavior unit all day, and then you've got to call them in at the end of the day and have a tricky conversation with them. Well, you might not want to do that. They could very well have been beat up that day. So think about what that message is and how you want to deliver it. Think about how they may have spent their day and what you want to do with that.
Yeah.
Oh, did you had an intake of breath there? Did you have
No,
more to
no,
say?
no. There's so much more you can say, but I just think that maintaining dignity and fostering growth means that if the only time you're having conversations with teachers is when you're having to deliver bad news,
Exactly.
then you need to step up the times you're having conversations, because there already needs to be built-in relationships and ongoing. I know who your kids are and their birthdays, and I'm going to find out what soccer game was played this week, and we celebrate each other's families. And then when we have a hard conversations is within that context. So if the only time I'm ever talking to someone is when I'm delivering some directive or instruction, that I would take that wrong if that's the only communication
Right.
I'm receiving.
Well, exactly. And Will, you and I have talked about this on the podcast before. The worst, Principle 101, the worst thing you can do is say nothing to a teacher for 8 months and then have their post evaluation and blast them with, 20 things that they're doing wrong. Like, if you haven't had that conversation ongoing, not fair to come in with a fastball when they're not ready for it. So that leads us actually to our next question about coaching and development. So Elizabeth, this is yours.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Warville. I've taught first grade and third grade. My question is, what role did coaching and ongoing professional development play in improving staff performance and morale at your school?
Can I clarify or ask for a clarification? Are you asking about like coaching I received in leadership, or just coaching for my staff, or all of the above?
I'm viewing it as coaching and professional development for your staff.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
I've seen benefits in both. So I'll answer this two ways. Yes, but I think it's really important if you identify an area where there's needed growth and you can find somebody who's really good at coaching or PD to come in and provide that. Because a lot of times people that are providing professional development or coaching, they have the time to really develop content and instructional time and models and all the things that you may not have time to do in-house. So I will say that. But then at the same time, you got people in-house who are just extraordinary at what they do. And if they're given the opportunity to internally teach and internally coach and internally model for other people too, that's super powerful because I think that when you see a peer that's giving you ideas and you can hold on to those things. So I think both have been really valuable. What I would caution leaders to think about, and I'm not just saying this to you, but also anyone who may be listening to this conversation. A lot of times what happens is if we're receiving PD or we're participating in professional development, the things we get excited about or the things that we begin to learn, we immediately want to execute that. We want to bring it back and just let's change things. Let's just do the thing I just learned. And what I've discovered is that you can really make life difficult for people if you're constantly bringing the things you're learning in and just immediately asking everybody to implement and change. So a lot of times when I see whether it's teachers or principals receiving PD and coaching, and then they're going to come back and share it with their peers, I just try to remind them to remember your friends may not have gotten to go through the same PD you did. So be patient. Begin to implement these things for yourself first, beta test them, try them, and see how they work, then begin to share them with others. And also don't run, I think sometimes leaders will send themselves to professional development, and then they'll come back and expect everybody to buy into what they've learned. And I'm like, that's a false assumption. You should be spending as much money and resources, if you're going to be hiring professional development, sending your people to that so that they can come back and create more buy-in. And so, those are just some first thoughts, Jen, I have on that. What would you add?
I would add this was my weakest area. I was thinking as you were talking, I don't think I always felt a day late and a dollar short in planning PD. I felt like I was so busy managing and trying to support students that professional development wasn't as much of a priority as it should have been. So proactive reflection is what I call that. Like I'm reflecting, but I know what I need to do better if I'm ever in the principal role again. Okay, so Steph Rush, you've got a question about workforce trends. Go ahead, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I'm Steph Rush. I'm a middle school intervention specialist for students with more intensive educational needs. And I'm just curious that in your work as an educational consultant, what current trends in human capital management do you believe future principals need to be aware of?
What a great question. I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert in trends, but I will say some things that I have observed. Flexibility is, I think, something super important to the generation of educators coming into this work. And I think flexibility is super important in the workforce in general. And so because my last stint before this work was working at a state principals association, and we had a staff, a small staff, we had about 13 people on our team. I noticed that as we were recruiting people out of college into the work, that the old fashioned, this is the begin time, this is the end time, this is when we do work, is not something that's shared among people. We're talking right now through laptops and computers sitting in our homes or sitting in your school buildings or wherever you are today, because we have flexibility now that we used to not have. And so I think as educators of students, we need to recognize the flexibilities that we should be providing for them, but we also need to be able to do that with our staff. So even though I was a principal in the old days, there were times when I would recognize my teachers are tired and I have an important meeting I need to hold with them next week. But let me just put together a quick little video of me saying the things that need to be communicated in that meeting. I'm going to send out that link and then ask them to just sign something that said that they viewed it so that I know that they got that information back. Because the more we can model the kinds of flexibility that we want to experience ourselves, I think the better it is in recognizing. I'm not a generational trends expert, but I do read a lot about the differences between all of the areas, millennials and Gen Zers, and what are we calling the news generation, the alphas? I don't know even what do we call the kids?
I don't know.
But it is, I think it's important for us to recognize. I employ now my oldest daughter to work for my organization, and Emily's 26, so the same age as many young teachers that are coming in. And because we communicate, I know she's doing her editing sometimes at 11:59 at night, because that's when I got the message that things were completed and uploaded or whatever. I'm asleep at 11:59 at night. But just recognizing that I've set up the standards for the work that I want to see accomplished, but I let her choose a lot of times the flexibility piece of what that's going to look like. I'll give you another example. We have daily meetings to just go over priorities that we're trying to manage for each day. And I give her the responsibility of setting the time. Let me know when you think we should meet that day, because she can look at my calendar and see when I'm free and when I'm available. But that puts the responsibility back on her to determine what time of day is best for her based on when I'm available. But so giving people ownership, I think, is important too. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I just think that's important for leaders to keep in mind, because if we're not willing to, and I think the same thing happens with AI. We have to be willing to be learners and try things and let people take risks and do, and even with, because if anybody ever gets the sense that as a leader your expectation for them is toe the line and never do anything wrong, then they're going to smother to death. You wouldn't want a classroom like that, and you certainly wouldn't want to lead a school like that.
Yeah, nobody needs another mother or father treating them like they haven't got themselves figured out. And like my late great grandfather always said, everybody thinks the generation coming up is a disaster, and they're gonna mess it all up, and they never seem to. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, you talked about knowing when your staff was tired, which leads us to a question about morale and burnout. So I see that he's ready, so I'm not even going to cue this one up. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, Will. My name's Cameron Carter. I teach first grade. And my question, connecting to what Jen just said, was what practical strategies did you use to boost staff morale and prevent burnout, especially during times when there was high stress or lots of change?
Oh my gosh, Cameron, I want you to be, did you say first grade?
Yes, first grade.
I want you to be my first grade teacher.
Oh gosh.
Like your energy is so contagious. So like we might have to do the video share of this, Jen, just because Cameron, if I was getting ready to experience staff burnout or morale problems in my school, I would just invite you to come in.
Well,
just let your energy fill the room. Jen, go
well,
ahead.
and I think too, I just need to say this to our listeners. I think that he has a newscaster name. I could see, hello everyone, it's Cameron Carter coming to you live tonight from Times Square. I mean, Cameron Carter, what a great name. Anyway,
Back in the day, I wanted to be a meteorologist, so there you go, right?
Yeah, you still could.
Yeah.
All right.
You still can.
So 2 weeks ago, I interviewed on my podcast Karen Borchert, and Karen leads a company called Alpaca, and they are a sponsor of our podcast, Jen. So I'm not trying to sell their wares, but the reason I interviewed Karen was because she started a company because she saw how hard it was in schools for teachers to stay encouraged, and how hard it was sometimes for leaders to find creative ways to make sure that they were boosting their morale. So she built this small company that provides several resources. One is a really easy questionnaire that they can send out at the beginning of each week just to kind of assess how people are doing. But then also these, I'm going to call them care packages, but they're just packs. They're just these really cool things. They've surveyed lots of teachers to see, like, what are your favorite office supplies? What are the things you want in your classroom? What are the things that would boost you for the week? So they have all these little packs that can be arrived so that you can be regularly also just providing teachers with some things that make them feel better. You and I have talked about this in other settings, Jen. A party's not going to boost morale by itself. A dress-up day is not going to boost morale by itself. Giving everybody their favorite drink on Friday is not going to boost morale by itself. But the collective commitment to keeping relationships centered, and I care about you as a human, and I hope you care about me as a human. I'm going to check on you. I'm going to be real with you. You be real with me. It does make a difference. And so I do think that there are ways that we can harness those things. Now, I did have someone on my team at my last school who I asked, can you, if I gave you a budget in the calendar, can you kind of be my celebration person? Because that's not my strength. I'm just not good at that. I never have been. And so she, at the beginning of every year, would take everybody's birthdays, any kind of, big moments throughout the year, Valentine's, Thanksgiving, and just set up times where we could celebrate together. And it was so great for me because I was able to have that person, you know, become a party organizer or something that we can do together, invite people to potlucks. And so there are often people on our staff that are really strong in like, let's pull together and let's reconnect and let's celebrate. So um, I know that's not the quick fix to that question. I think the other thing I would say too is it's really important if you have an idea for change to time when you want to do change. That's why I tell especially principals, if you have an idea in the spring that you think is going to be great for the way you're changing things, beta test it and do it next year. So that you're not overwhelming people with unnecessary changes right in the middle of the hard work that they're already doing. Jen, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that those things you mentioned about morale, they don't work in isolation. They really don't. And people would say to me, "Oh, people love food." Well, okay, if I just stop at the donut shop and get 3 dozen donuts and plop them down in the lounge and walk away to my office, close the door and be like, they'd better thank me for this. That's not gonna improve morale. It's the whole package, right? It's that they feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're valued. And maybe they get a donut too. I think the donut does matter, but only on top of other things too. All right, we have talked a lot, Will, in this class about standardization of how staff are evaluated and treated and how that's really tricky because every staff member's story is different. Their needs are different. We've talked about that quite a bit. And this is, just so you know, this is our second to last class together. So we have done that. We have looked at this inside and out, but Deanna has a question for you about it. Love to hear your perspective. So Deanna, you're up.
Hello, my name is Deanna Ross. I'm an intervention specialist at a high school. And my question is, how did you ensure equity and fairness in staff evaluations, promotions, and leadership opportunities?
Yeah, that is a loaded question because there's so many layers there. So I'll just say this, since you guys have talked about this in before, it's really important, I think, and I know this varies from district to district, state to state, region to region, but so I'll just speak to my experience. It was really important in the schools where I served for us to have a common expectation for schedules, for numbers of observations, evaluations, and an agreed upon instrument, but of which everyone was going to be using the same across schools and across districts. And so I'm hoping most of you have that in place, but if you don't, that's the first place to start, is to make sure you have some common agreed upon way, process and standards. So, but it's also important that if you're the one utilizing that tool, that you know how to use it, but then you also become the teacher of your teachers of this is how we're going to use it. So this is how the tool works. This is how I'm going to use it when I'm with you. This is how often I'm going to use it. And I'm just going to say this as a will practice. One of the most important commitments I made every summer stepping into the school year, and Jen, you're going to laugh at me because you and I probably do these things a little bit different, but I would take 2 or 3 teachers a week and I would place them on my schedule for each week the entire year in advance, so that I knew every single week as I stepped into the week which 2 or 3 teachers I'm going to be concentrating time in their classrooms for feedback and observations. And of course, all of those are rotating over the numbers of times I'm going to be with them that year. And I would share that list out in advance with my staff to just say, I'm not picking the day I'm going to be in your room this far in advance. I'm just letting you know on that week, expect to see me. And what that did for me was it gave me a way to just chunk the time so that I'm equitably seeing everybody. And so that they also knew in advance, I'm going to usually reach out the week before and say, hey, remember next week I'm coming to see you. Is there something you would like me to come by and spend some time with? Or is there an hour you want me to avoid because maybe you're just doing assessment the whole time? So it was really important for me to build those structures in advance so that I'm lowering the amount of anxiety that other people have about my time with them. And then the last thing I'm going to say is something that actually was another guest on my show. David Yeager wrote a book called The Mentor Mindset. And he's done a lot of research. He's a psychologist, he's a psychology professor, but a former middle school teacher. And I loved this because he showed me the evidence where he had done some feedback surveys with students and with teachers and with employees. And whenever a teacher or a principal or a manager is just direct about they're implicit about why I want to be very clear why I'm coming to see you or why I'm spending time in your room or why I'm asking you to do this. You can put it in all those settings. The performance metrics on students or teachers or people being managed immediately go up for people who have to guess why you're there. And so I would just say one of the most important things you can do is just be very, I should have said explicit, very explicit about why I want to be with you, what I'm doing here, and what this process is going to look like. So, man, Jen, this is a hard question to answer that.
I know these questions are so good, and no, you're doing a great job. And for our listeners, you only have only two more hot seat questions for Will. This one we're going to shift a little bit into your consulting and podcast work now. So,
okay.
Maddie, you're up.
Hi, my name is Maddie Flatfoot, and I'm a sixth grade math teacher. And my question for you is, through your consulting work, what common human capital challenges do you see schools facing, and how can principals proactively address them?
I may have addressed that already, Maddie, but so I'll just come back to something that I've said before. It is hard. It's hard when you have openings. It's hard when you have needs. If you can't find the kind of persons that you think are really the strongest. So I've seen a lot of schools that are beginning to grow their own. If there's a need, they're going to figure out how to grow their own. In fact, Jen, you and I just talked about this recently, how in Dublin, you guys recognized, man, our students need stronger support through social services, but yet we're not finding in our own social workers the kind of people who have both an understanding of those needs, but also of education. You grew your own. I don't know if you've shared that with this class, but you guys have now paid for the degrees of 25 of your own employees there in Dublin schools who are now going to be stepping back into the schools to work at the capacity of an educator who's also functioning as a social worker. Am I explaining that correctly, Jen?
Oh my gosh, I'm a little bit annoyed because you said it so much better than I did when we talked about this. I think it took me about 20 minutes to say what you just said in 2 sentences. Annoying when he's so much more concise than me. Yes, that's exactly it. Well, that's it.
Yeah. So the lesson for me there is, and I've seen this across the US. I work with a principal down in Pecos, Texas. It looks like a desert down there, and it's a really hard place to recruit people in West Texas. So what did he do when he recognized I'm having a hard time getting young people to move into this community because housing's hard to find? He talked the board into letting them build an apartment complex, beautiful place with nice apartments, 1-2 bedrooms, courtyards, places where people can meet. The kind of place that when I visited, I couldn't believe a school owned it because it would look like the kind of place I would want to have lived when I was in my 20s. And so now he's got a recruiting tool that if you move here, I'm not only going to pay you well, but also you're going to get an incredible discount on the teacher housing that we have available in this amazing apartment complex. So I'm seeing leaders across the US that are just doing super creative things to try to fill a gap when it comes to, we're not just looking for people that are capable, but we're also having to figure out ways to attract them here too. So through my consulting work, I think that's probably been the most eye-opening thing for me, is just watching all the different creative ways that people are addressing ways. How do we do it ourselves? If we can't count on the systems to produce what we need, how do we improve those systems? But then how can we also begin to create better systems ourselves?
Well, and I'm glad you said that about housing. There's, I think rural districts are really struggling with that. Rural areas don't necessarily have, just a house or an apartment for somebody to move into. So it's something that's absolutely going to need to be addressed. Okay. And the last one, Brenna, why don't you introduce yourself and offer Will the last question?
Hi, I'm Brenna Hailu, and I'm a first grade teacher. My question is, from your experience as a podcaster, what are the most compelling or surprising insights you've gained from other educational leaders regarding human capital management?
Mm. Well, let me just sound like an old guy for a minute because you asked from my experience as a podcaster. So when I was a high school administrator, I before that I was a language arts teacher. I taught a creative writing elective. I taught AP language. I loved I loved literature and I love to read, and I don't even mind teaching grammar, Jen, even though it's not as fun as the rest. But when I stepped into school admin, um, I learned to love that work too. At first, it was pretty overwhelming, and I had to figure out how to be myself in that work. But fast forward, and I was probably in my seventh or eighth year of admin, and I realized that one of the things I was really missing was just teaching writing and teaching, that part of my brain that wasn't being exercised anymore. So I just kind of started thinking, how can I marry these worlds? So back then there weren't a lot of people podcasting, and but there were a lot of people that were writing blogs. So I started a weekly blog where I would just write lessons I'm learning as an educator, and I would post it out, and my mom would read it, and then eventually a few of my friends. But over time, it began to grow into this audience of other leaders who would tell me they look forward to it every week to get this from me. So after about 2 years of that, I was able to do my first book with a lot of the content that came from that. And then what I discovered was I was starting to listen to podcasts, and this was around 2015, 2014, 2015. And if you know the podcasting world, that was when podcasts were just beginning to really to pop. Now it seems like everybody has a podcast, but so in 2016, I decided just to take the same content I was doing weekly and record it. So just an audio recording of me with the same content, and I began to share that out. And then I began to see a whole nother audience growing through the podcasting. So for a couple of years, it was just me. I would just share the same things every single week that I was learning. And it wasn't until probably Jen, right before we met, that I started really starting to bring in guests. And so that's where my eyes really started opening, because I have 420 something episodes now of my podcast. It's been downloaded more than 1.5 million times. But I've had people ask me why I didn't work on a doctoral degree or a PhD. And part of it's because I didn't want to, but the other part is because I've had so much fun learning over the last several years from literally hundreds of other people. And so it's really hard for me to say in just one sentence what's been the most surprising or compelling, because what I've discovered is when I'm willing to sit in the room and just listen to someone, every single person I've ever sat on the other side of always has some way to challenge my thinking in ways that I haven't been challenged before. They have an experience that I've never had to experience before. They have an insight that's going to be helpful for me. And so I would just say probably the most compelling insight I've gained is that the cycle of reflecting on what am I learning and what are other people learning, that just that cycle of reflection by itself has provided me with more joy, with more learning, with more insight, and with more ideas of things to do next than I've ever experienced before. And so I guess if I could leave you guys with some motivation, it would just be give yourself permission to stay a student, because that same light that you want to see in the eyes of those kids every single day when you're teaching them, you deserve to have that same light going off in your eyes. And it happens when you stay hungry to learn. And so, Jen, this podcast for me has just been a journey in learning. And I hope I can keep doing it, because it's just been something it's changed the way I learn. And I hope that by bringing people stories to others, it can change the way they learn too.
I think that's such a great way to end. Well, we do have to stay learning. We do have to stay sharp. We do have to follow the hunger. When I think about educators that are jaded and exhausted and counting the days till they retire, they maybe didn't keep following that hunger, and we're talking to a pretty friendly crowd here because they're all in a master's program. They are following that desire to keep learning. So a great point. And also, let's just note how hard it is to stay a podcaster. Many people start podcasting, very few stay because it's hard work. And Will, you said that before, like every week you had to have something. And that takes a lot of perseverance. So shout out to you. Well, Will, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys for this opportunity, and please stay connected. I know you know Jen, so if you want to ever reach out to me or just jump on a one-on-one, I love to reflect with leaders. So you can always find my resources at my website, which is my name, williamdparker.com.
Yeah, check out his website. There's a lot of wonderful things there. Plus 400 and how many? I don't know, 425 or so thereabouts episodes of podcasts. You guys
Jen and I have recorded so many in advance that we've got Jen right now. I think the last one we recorded goes out in August. So I mean,
we're way ahead of time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a great night. Thanks so much for coming by.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.